The Atheist Debates Patreon project presents a Q&A from patrons, January 2018. So one of the things I'm going to do in 2018 is make this process a little more interactive. I've covered a lot of topics, and I'm still going to be doing debates and debate reviews. I've got a debate scheduled for July, a number of events with Sam Harris, Lawrence Krauss, and then a world tour of magic and skepticism coming up. But I'm going to try and schedule interactive discussions, maybe as Google Hangouts with patrons. The problem is Google Hangout quality of video and audio is never as good as I can do with this camera. Even if I'm traveling, I can pack something that comes out better than Google Hangouts. But I want to make sure that I'm interacting with the people who are supporting this Patreon project and answering the questions that they want. So one of the things I've started doing is combing through the email to look at questions that came from patrons. And for this video for January, I've got a list of questions. I have no idea how long it's going to take me to answer. And this is going to be kind of free form. I probably won't even do any editing, so it feels like we're, just having a conversation. But this will be open for any questions. And if you're a patron and you'd like your question answered, you can send me the message over Patreon's messaging system, or you can always email me, sansdeity@gmail.com, and we'll do what we can to answer stuff. And when I have questions that I don't really have a good answer for, I have a number of people left that I still want to interview and have conversations with, and I can direct your questions to them. So let's get started. I took down 4 or 5 questions because I know that I don't tend to give short answers, but I'll do the best I can. And the first one's probably going to irritate some people, but I want to give a little background. Last month, or at the very, very beginning of January, I suppose, I did an event in New York City with Sam Harris and Lawrence Krauss. And we polled people to find out what topics they wanted to discuss, because we'll be doing it again in 2 events in February in Chicago and Phoenix. And one of the most requested topics to cover was free will. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole topic here. It's huge. But people know that I'm a compatibilist a la Dan Dennett, and that I've had back and forths on free will with a number of people, and that Sam and I agree on many things, including moral foundations and things like that. So the fact that we perhaps somewhat disagree on free will was a point of contention. And Lawrence Krauss has also spoken about free will, and I've battled against a whole bunch of people on this, mainly because I'm optimistic. Dennett had said that Sam was a compatibilist and he just didn't know it. And years ago on the Nonprofits, we had a 3-hour episode where the bulk of it was about free will. And after arguing for hours, it turns out that all of us agreed on what we had. We just couldn't necessarily agree on what to call it. You can hear the audio of me and Sam and Lawrence on Sam's podcast, Waking Up, and I think it's out there on YouTube as well. So I'm not going to go through the entire discussion. But the very end of that discussion, there was something Sam said that I called out and that Lawrence addressed in a slightly different fashion, and I think it's important. So I'm going to kind of run through it real quick here as an answer to this question asking me to discuss free will and the interaction that I had with Sam and Lawrence. Sam's objection is that compatibilists seem to just be redefining free will, perhaps even defining it into existence. I don't want to put words into his mouth. You can listen to what he has to say. And I don't disagree with him. I think that if we take a look at what people have actually cared about when it comes to free will, whether or not we have it, I agree with him that it's, from a physical standpoint, that it's illusory. I'm talking about it from a conceptual standpoint. And the example that I'd used in New York was if Sam jumped off stage, that would be him as an agent taking an act of volition. It doesn't matter if it was predetermined by the universe or not. But alternately, I could throw him off the stage. And the difference between those 2 events sums up everything that I think is valuable about the notion of free will. I don't... He had mentioned this, in his view, what people think about when they think about free will is, oh, if I could go back in time, I could do it differently. I don't know that that's actually, I know people think like that. They'll say, oh, if only I could go back, I'd do it differently. But if you think about that question, if I could go back, I would do it differently. What they're actually saying is, if I could go back with the knowledge that I have now, I would do it differently. They're not saying that if we rewound the clock, that they could do it differently. They're saying that they wish they could have done it differently. It's kind of, if I knew then what I know now. And in that context, if I could go back in time to the start of this particular video, knowing what I know now, there's a good chance that I would do something differently, that I would say something differently, because it's not me from the beginning of this video, it's me from this point in the video going back, and things have changed. Whether or not you call it free will, I'm not overly concerned about that. But I pointed out that Sam's complaint or challenge to what compatibilists are doing is that they're essentially redefining free will. And Lawrence pointed out that he's essentially redefining nothing. And I noted that Sam and I are both essentially redefining morality, that throughout history, the terms nothing, morality, and free will have had specific usages. And what we've learned is that the way they were understood in the past, the way nothing, morality, and free will were understood in the past, those things essentially aren't real. But there may still be a valuable perspective on the concept that's worth retaining. Now, Sam had brought up that Dennett seems to be afraid of the consequences of what would happen in a world if the people find out they don't have the free will that they think they do. That's not a concern of mine. And one of these days, I hope to be able to sit down with Dennett and talk about free will and figure out where the boundaries, where we agree, where we disagree. But it reminded me of something else that I think I'm going to attribute to James Randi, which, and I'm paraphrasing, real magic is fake and fake magic is real. This notion of magic has had a context in people's minds throughout history. And it's people pretending to do magic that we now recognize as magic. You go see a magician, you hopefully realize that he's not actually sawing somebody in half, he's not actually levitating, that these are acts of deception. It's okay, and this was the point that Krauss made at the end that I liked, when he redefines nothing, this is what he looks at as learning, that we have. He didn't go into it in great detail, but like I was saying a minute ago, the understanding that we had of nothing is not a thing. It's nothing that could exist. It doesn't, creation ex nihilo, the idea of creating something completely from nothing, all of that's nonsense. But there may be a context of nothing that actually is valuable and real. I think that's the case for morality. I also think that's the case for free will, because what I care about is not, are my actions determined by the physical facts of the universe? I'm convinced that essentially they are. I'm not appealing to anything magical that I can somehow violate the laws of the universe. What I care about are the interactions between thinking agents, and when this agent's will, this agent's desires, are impeded, halted, whatever, by another agent. I don't look at free will as a problem. For example, I can't flap my wings and float up into the air. That's the laws, physical laws of the universe don't allow that. So that sort of desire, a desire to do that, is not what I'm talking about when I talk about free will. There's nothing about the laws of the universe that prevents me from sitting here and recording this video. I have a desire to do that. If my desire to do this video was impeded by some other agent, shutting the channel down or destroying my camera or something like that, those conflicts of will are the sort of things that I care about and have value. It's not, I wish I could go back in time and do it differently. That's not what I view as free will. And if, for example, what I'm calling free will, you just don't want to call free will, that's fine. In the same way that what I call morality, Sam and I both, when we're talking about well-being of thinking creatures, that's not what everybody thinks about for morality. As a matter of fact, after that event in New York, I had probably a 5 to 10 minute mini debate with someone who's a former believer who thinks that I'm entirely wrong about morality and thinks that morality is only religious and that whatever I'm talking about is something else. And as I pointed out to him, well, if you don't want to call it morality, that's fine, but do you and I agree on well-being, that it's derived from physical facts in the universe? And he was so hung up on making sure that I knew that he thought I was completely wrong that he wouldn't even agree to that until, I kept stopping and saying, no, I'm just asking about well-being. I'm not asking about morality. I'm just asking about well-being. And we had to do this over and over and over because his mind was lockstep into he's trying to trick me into acknowledging about morality. And I wasn't. I don't care if you call it morality. I don't care if you call it free will. I'm not as worried about the labels as I am the concept. And for me, the thing that I identify as free will is the interactions between thinking agents and our ability or inability to achieve our desired goals, no matter where those desires come from, and when someone is impeding it. That's pretty much it. So the next question, which isn't completely clear, but it's basically asking about the popularity of apologetics. How can apologetics and apologists continue to be popular when they've all been debunked? Well, first of all, it's not about debunking. We talked about this before with skepticism. You and I, assuming I'm talking to, secular skeptics who are baffled at how people can still believe and how there can still be popularity among apologetics when we've so clearly destroyed their arguments. You and I see the flaws in it, but that doesn't mean everybody's going to. We all think we're right, and we have an incredible predisposition to not see the bias in how we go about evaluating things. So if I'm convinced that there's a God and someone presents evidence and argument that seems to support my view, I'm not going to be as critical about it. I mean, this is the thing that skeptics have to train themselves to see, is to do what we can to eliminate that bias, to eliminate our desire to show that we're right at all costs. So, as an example, when I was a fundamentalist Christian, Josh McDowell's Evidence That Demands a Verdict was an incredibly important book because it seemed to be a thorough, scholarly, just end-all, be-all confirmation of everything that I believed. It is not actually that, but when you're a believer, you are prone to, we all, whether we're believers or not, are prone to rationalizing. We are prone to confirmation bias. We have a number of flaws in our thinking. And you don't even begin to suspect that you could be wrong if you are actively involved in a religious community. You're going to church, everybody around you believes the same things you do, and they all are, the people who are much more knowledgeable about this stuff than you. They have the information and they have what appears to be good arguments. It's not just simple personality. A preacher gets up and preaches, and because everybody likes him and he's great, or because he's been touched by the Holy Spirit, everybody likes him and he's great. It is always about ourselves, as far as I'm concerned. I had my beliefs. As long as it seemed reasonable, I was going to continue in those beliefs and continue with confidence, with strong confidence. This is preaching to the choir, essentially. And the old joke of preaching to the choir is how you get them to sing. But we see this same confirmation bias and sort of isolation. If you grow up and you're spending all your time around people who believe the same things you do, then of course the apologetics that seem like good arguments are going to be some of your favorites, and they're going to maintain their popularity. We see this on social media as well, where depending on what things you like and who you interact with, you can end up in a little bubble where you're constantly having your positions reinforced. So it's not surprising to me that apologetics have maintained their popularity, because there are people who are, whether they're indoctrinated into a religion at a young age or they find it because of some need or some fear, they really have a desire for this religion to be true. It's nice to think that, oh, there's somebody who loves you no matter what, and when you die, you're not dead. And so if there's all these promises, one of the questions I get asked sometimes from believers, as a matter of fact, in New York, I was asked about this by a Christian who came to the event. You know, where do you get your hope from? What is there to hope for? And what happens if you're wrong? You know, what if there's a God and you don't want to end up with hell? So we went down the Pascal's wager route, and we went down how I would view a God if it turned out I was wrong. And so I talked about intellectual honesty and what kind of God would punish someone for being sincere and honest about what they found acceptable, what they found reasonable. And she loved the answers that I gave. You know, it was a good conversation. But I think the keys to this are to do some of the things that I've done, which is engage with the opposition. And that's actually going to tie into the next question that I was asked. I didn't even realize that till now. But part of this engaging with the opposition is also about trying to do what you can to be honest and remove as much of your personal bias as you can. This is why seminaries that have textual criticism, a strong critical examination of the holy books, in this case the Bible, you'd be surprised, I think, at how many people leave those seminaries as atheists, or at least no longer having, certainly not the fundamentalist views that they might have walked in with. And it's because this open, honest examination, this critical examination, raises problems that aren't easily resolved. There's a reason why I talk about slavery, or I talk about what the Bible has to say about rape. But at the end of the day, people will say, yes, but what if those parts aren't right, but some other parts of it are true? This desperation to find a way to justify what you believe is exactly why apologetics are popular with people who want to help convince themselves that they have the right view, but also to share that view with others. There are plenty of people who go to church on a regular basis who have no interest in interacting with anybody else. They don't know any apologists, they don't know any apologetic arguments, they couldn't tell you, probably couldn't name the books of the Bible, they don't know much about how the religion's formed. They are just a part of this. This is what they believe, this is what they do on Sundays or Saturdays, and that's just the way it's going to be. They don't have an interest in engaging. But when you start engaging with people who don't agree with you, and you start to realize that, oh, wow, I don't know enough about this, going out and finding people who know more about it is the next natural step. And that's why apologists and apologetic arguments continue to maintain their popularity. Although, as the popularity of religions in general decline, maybe we'll see a decline in that. So question number 3 was, what ideas deserve to be addressed and what ideas deserve to be dismissed? Wow. This is kind of complicated because there's no easy answer here. Coming up at the end of my world tour in April, I'm going to be sitting down for a head-to-head discussion with Jordan Peterson. And one of the first things that happened when we announced this is somebody said, oh, should you really be giving him a platform? Well, I don't know a great deal about Jordan Peterson. I know I've read some things from him. There are areas where we agree. There are areas where we really, really disagree. But we're not offering him a platform. He's already, getting incredibly popular, and there's news articles being written about him and other things. So it's not like we're elevating someone's status. I've spoken to Dawkins about debating creationists, should this ever happen. And my take on it is I don't want Dawkins spending his time debating creationists. I'd rather have him educating the public about science. And I mean, that's what he's good at. He enjoys it. And that doesn't risk elevating. But I think that there are a sufficient number of people who accept creationism and other bad notions, that the solution to bad ideas is better ideas. And that's why I would I'd like to see the ideas that are being offered by young Earth creationists, age creationists, be addressed openly and honestly. Sometimes that means that you share a stage with somebody. Sometimes it means you just point out where they're wrong. I don't have to, it's not unfair of me to say, here's what this member of the KKK had to say about human rights and why I think it's wrong. I don't have to give them a podium to be able to engage with the ideas as long as I'm doing it fairly and honestly. That's not always what happens though. When we are fighting one set of propaganda with another set of propaganda, and we are all prone to hyperbole, we're prone to misrepresenting other people. And so sometimes it's better to get people on a stage. Sometimes it's better to have that conversation and that interaction. As I mentioned earlier, this social media bubble that you can find yourself in by only having people who agree with you. But I'm happy to block people or not have conversations on, for example, Facebook, because that's a place that's not, Facebook is not my podium, and I don't have to engage with everybody. There are people that I've debated that I don't see any need to debate again. The complexity of this question of, what ideas are worth engaging with, I think it's kind of a risk-reward analysis. How many people hold this idea? Is the individual that you're speaking to representative of some group of people? Is it representative of these particular ideas? Do you think that there's a likelihood of a productive conversation or a possibility to expose that there can't be a productive conversation? Is it something that you do once and then you don't have to do again? I have done several debates with Blake Junta. He's sat right here on this couch and we've had conversations. We are friendly, if not friends. We don't get to interact as much as I think either of us would like, but we have good conversations. That's not true with me and Seitan Bruggencate. That's just not going to happen again. This same issue has come up in terms of the skeptic community. If you have someone who claims to be a psychic getting messages from the other side and you test them and they fail, and you test them again and they fail, and you test them again and they fail, and then you find somebody else who has the same claim and you test them and they fail, and you test them, how many times do you need to actually test this before you can just be done with it? Well, there's no easy answer to that either. On the one hand, you can make a strong case that we have tried this many, many times and nobody's been able to demonstrate that they can do what they claim they can do. And until that changes, we certainly don't need to put together a full study and have the JREF put up, the $1 million prize for, demonstrating paranormal activity, until there's a good reason to think there's something to this. That said, you don't get to say, we've proven that psychics claiming to speak with the dead are frauds. You can't do that. What you can certainly show that some of them likely are. You can point out that none of them have met their burden of proof. But that doesn't mean that you can say, we're done testing this now, we don't ever have to consider it again. Because now you've walled it off and you're closed-minded. I think there's a case where you can openly and honestly expose, criticize, critique, and rebut bad ideas without engaging with people who are, shock jock, genuinely terrible. And then there's a time and a place to have discussions. I've said before, I don't have to consult anybody from the KKK about human rights because I already know that their views about equality are awful. So I don't see how there's a productive conversation there. You could argue that you could say the same thing about engaging with theists. The difference here is in the number of people who are participating in something like, the KKK or a hate group, and the number of people who just sincerely believe something and haven't been exposed to the information. So I think if the goal is honest education and fairly addressing claims, then there's nothing that should be off the table. If there's people out there who think the earth is flat, and even if it's a tiny minority of people, if they're spreading the bad information all over the internet, it deserves to be countered. That doesn't mean it deserves to be the primary focus or that people need to spend just mountains of energy on it. So yeah, I wish there was an easy answer. There's not. My goal is to do my best to present humanism, skepticism, atheism to as many people as I can. Sometimes I'm going to be on stage with people that I vehemently disagree with, and hopefully I get an opportunity to expose the how and why of that. There are some people I wouldn't share a stage with. It's kind of a personal thing. There are probably people in the atheist, matter of fact, I know there are people within the broader atheist community that I have no interest in actually working with, but that's a personal preference thing. Not everybody's style is the same, and not everybody sees the same value in every conversation, which is why I don't have 1 million subscribers or 10 million subscribers. So do the best you can with what you have. And I think the most important thing is to realize when a conversation has run its course. Hosting the TV show for all these years, I've hung up on people. I've had 45-minute plus conversations with individuals. It's something you kind of learn. You figure out when there's a value. And probably the most important thing is have an audience. It's fine if you want to have one-on-one conversations, but they're far more valuable, those one-on-one conversations, if somebody else is going to see it, which is, I have more email than I can possibly answer. If I spent time answering one-on-one questions, I'd never get to do this stuff. I'd never get to, do a debate. So I guess that's one of the reasons why I'm doing Q&A in this form. So let's see what's next. So I'm actually going to combine the last two questions into one, because it's a bit of fun. When Sam and Lawrence and I were polling people to ask, what kind of questions should we ask each other and what topics should be addressed, there's one that came up that I maybe will address in one of the upcoming events. But it's two questions. One is, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of the world in general? And the other one is, what would an atheistic world look like, and would that actually be better? So this one's easy. I'm overall incredibly optimistic. Setting aside politics for a moment, I see problems in the world with regard to ideology and differences, but I also see that reason seems to win out. It's going to be a struggle. You're going to have improvements, but the trend seems to be a world where we know and understand more about the world we live in, where we are becoming more and more of a single world community, even though we're nowhere near that. And we are certainly going to continue to be somewhat dysfunctional. Racism is still an issue. Sexism is still an issue. We are not in a post-ism world. We've not solved all the problems. But when I look at things like Steven Pinker's book, Better Angels of Our Nature, and various studies showing that we live in the best possible time on almost any scale that you wish to measure. And I'm optimistic. I see the internet, both with YouTube videos and, if people have more access to information. This doesn't come without problems. We talked earlier about the sort of insular bubbles that you can get into on social media. There's also so much information out there that you now have the problem of which website do you pay attention to, which expert, who have they thrown in a lab coat in order to convince you of something that's not actually true. And so we're going to face a lot of those problems. And you can't just, it'd be nice, if, I'm sure most people are familiar with Snopes, a site where you can go to find out whether or not this internet, story is true or not true, or there's PolitiFact and other organizations that are, hey, let's evaluate these claims and find out, who's telling the truth and who's lying. But then you can just say, well, I don't believe those people. I don't accept that. By and large, though, I think the world is improving. I'm incredibly optimistic. When it comes to bigger issues like climate change, who knows? Maybe we'll get to the point where we're starting to improve in so many areas, and then we all die because we were stupid about something. But when people ask, what would an atheistic world look like, and would that be better? I'm not going for an atheistic world. I think it happens as a byproduct. I think a secular world is what happens as a byproduct. My goal is to go for a rational world, a humanist world, but more importantly, a world where we have access to as much an accurate understanding of the universe as possible. If it turns out there is a God, that's something that I'd love for everybody to know. If it turns out that souls are real or ghosts are real or whatever, that's all good information to know. I don't see any reason to think that's likely. And the trend toward scientific understanding and reasonableness seems to be working in opposition to the superstitious and the supernatural. But my goal isn't let's make a world where nobody believes in the supernatural. It's let's make a world where people believe true things and don't believe false things. If it turns out there's a supernatural realm, then that's something we should accept. This question's come up before, what an atheistic world look like? I don't know. I think that religions as we know and understand them now are eventually going to fade. But I don't think they're going to completely go away for, in any time in the near future. And what we'll see are different, fuzzier sets of woo and superstitious belief. I think a lot of the new fads, crystals and, I don't know, you can make a laundry list of things people are into now. I think this is part of the flailing about. When you see a backlash from religions, where some people are getting more fundamentalist and some people are getting more fuzzy liberal, this is the death throes. People have said the internet's where religions go to die. This is the sort of things, desperation that you see. They can't make an argument. They don't have evidence. They're losing parishioners. People are starting to say, I don't need that, or this part's not real, and you get into more deistic notions of God, or everybody, thinks of God in their own way, and it's no sweat off my back to, you believe what you believe and I'll believe what I believe. And, that fuzziness, I think, shuffles up all the religions, and what you end up with are less harmful bad beliefs and less rigid structures amongst large populations. So right now you look at something like Westboro Baptist Church, which is a hateful, extremely fundamentalist collection of a couple of families, and yet they get a lot of attention despite the fact that it's a small group. I'm optimistic that in the future that attention won't be there, and there'll be a lot of those little smaller groups, and the larger groups will be far closer to like Unitarian Universalist or something. But I can't predict the future. Who knows? Maybe we'll start a nuclear war tomorrow, or maybe we've passed the point of no return with regard to climate change and other issues. And a lot of these discussions that we have will turn out to, in the end, be futile. But I'm stuck. I have to address the things that I care about, to have the conversations where I have some minimal expertise. I have no expertise on climate change. And I'm not particularly good in a lot of political realms. That's okay. If you are convinced that you are doing the best you can with what you have, and that you are doing more good than harm and encouraging others to do the same, and encourage others to have a good understanding of the world, I'm kind of fine with that. And so I'm optimistic about the future. There are some potentially terrifying things in our future, but While I can't tell you what an atheistic world would look like, I am optimistic about getting closer to it. That's all the questions that I had for this round. We'll set up some Hangouts or Q&A throughout the rest of this year so that maybe people will ask questions that I hadn't thought of or hadn't considered, and maybe some that I don't have any sort of answer for at all, although maybe that was the case today. Anyway, thanks a lot to all the patrons who are supporting, and I think there'll be an announcement at the end of this about how you can help out too. Bye-bye.
This video is made possible by supporters of the Atheist Debates Patreon project. You can find more information and add your support at patreon.com/atheistdebates.